The entire Western Desolation City became somewhat stirred upon the arrival of the group in the sky. Countless people's eyes were filled with curiosity. Clearly, they were eager to know which side would ultimately emerge victorious in this clash of such formidable lineups. This battle undoubtedly also concerned the pride of both the Dragon Demon Palace and the Northern Heavens Spiritual Academy. Due to various reasons, the supreme beings from both sides couldn't intervene directly and could only watch from the shadows. As such, the current lineups were the most elite forces either side could send. Shen Cangsheng stood proudly in the sky, his gaze sharp as a blade, locking onto the devil dragon child. His eyes moved slightly upward, and he saw 3 massive iron cages. Inside the cages were Lin Zhang and his 2 companions, gravely wounded and unconscious. Mu Chen and the others also saw Lin Zhang and his 2 companions trapped in the iron cages. Their expressions turned cold, their eyes burning with killing intent. They respected Lin Zhang and the others, as they were their seniors, but seeing them treated in such a humiliating manner filled them with immense anger. "Heh, seems like you're all quite angry," the devil dragon child said, looking at Shen Cangsheng and Mu Chen with indifferent smiles as they glared at him with murderous intent. "You should be grateful that I've locked them up here. Otherwise, they would have been dealt with by now. I'll repay you for everything you've done, 100-fold, Shen Cangsheng said, his grip tightening around his golden spear, the veins on the back of his hand bulging. His voice was deep, filled with cold menace. "Well then, I hope you can back up those words," the devil dragon child said with a grin. "So what's next? What moves do you have? Show them all, and we'll take them all on." Shen Cangsheng's voice was frigid. After all, Lin Zhang and his companions were still in the enemy's hands, and they were still somewhat restrained. They couldn't act like the devil dragon child, who cared nothing for the lives of his comrades. Just as expected from the heavenly ranking champion, "You really have some guts," the devil dragon child chuckled, giving a thumbs up. His expression darkened, and he grinned, revealing his sharp, white teeth. "Actually, it's quite simple. We've set up 4 duels. You send 4 people to fight, and that's it. But don't expect a fair fight. As long as each person defeats their opponent, they can either stop or team up with others. The goal is simple: no surrender, no retreat." By the end of his speech, the devil dragon child's smile turned cruel. Mu Chen's eyes narrowed. The devil dragon child clearly wanted one-on-one battles. He'd defeat his opponents quickly, then move on to the others. This way, he wouldn't have to worry about being overwhelmed, especially with Shen Cangsheng about to break through to the late heaven-reaching stage. If there were another opponent, turning it into a 2-on-1 battle, even the devil dragon child would struggle. Previously, he'd been able to deal with Lin Zhang and his companions by picking them off one by one. If they'd fought together, there was no way he could have captured all 3 of them. Now, the devil dragon child clearly intended to fight alone, confident that none of Mu Chen's group could match him one-on-one. That way, he could quickly win, then deal with the others. This also avoided the risk of being surrounded, but there was a condition. The devil dragon child needed to win swiftly. Only then could he free his hands to deal with the others. It was clear that he had immense confidence in his own strength. Shen Cangsheng and the others exchanged looks, realizing the devil dragon child's strategy. While they outnumbered him, the fact that Lin Zhang and his companions were in the enemy's hands left them with limited options. "Seems like you have a lot of confidence in yourself," Shen Cangsheng said, taking a step forward. His golden spear burst into brilliant golden light, and in the radiance, he looked like a battle god. His cold gaze fixed on the devil dragon child. "We accept your challenge." "Impressive!" The devil dragon child laughed loudly, his voice laced with chilling intent. He then waved his hand, his figure floating into the air. The other 3 people followed, taking positions in different corners of the vast sky. The 3 were Mu Gu, ranked 3rd on the bounty list, Gue Xiong, ranked 4th, and Wu Jia, ranked 5th. Mu Gu and Gue Xiong were both mid-stage heaven-reaching powerhouses, while Wu Jia was a 5th-ranked spiritual array master, an even more tricky and unpredictable opponent. None of them were pushovers. Gue Xiong laughed maniacally, his body surrounded by an overwhelming malevolent aura. His face twisted in a cruel expression as he glared at Mu Chen and the others. The giant axe in his hand seemed ready to split the heavens and the earth. Mu Gu gave a cold, indifferent smile. His emaciated body glowed with a faint white radiance, his bones faintly visible under his skin. His gaze locked onto Luo Li. Yesterday's battle still hadn't brought him the satisfaction he craved. Wu Jia, however, was positioned at the back of the group. He remained silent, sitting quietly in mid-air. The air around him rippled slightly, emitting a strange fluctuation. Like a venomous snake, he was silent and invisible, yet capable of delivering a deadly strike in an instant. Inside the grand hall of the city, the azure-robed man gazed with mild interest at the confrontation in the sky. "Heh, young hall master," the figure behind the azure-robed man chuckled. "It seems the devil dragon child is quite clever. His strength is the greatest among the four. In a one-on-one battle, perhaps only Shen Cangsheng could stand a chance against him, but it wouldn't be for long. Once he ends his battle, the entire situation will likely be decided." The azure-robed man nodded slightly and said, "But if the other three battlefields end with victories for Northern Song's Spiritual Academy, then the situation could change." Mu Gu and Gu Xiong both possess mid-heaven-reaching stage strength. Li Xintong can handle one of them and might even have the upper hand. But that's all. He won't be able to resolve the battle quickly. Aside from Li Xintong and Shen Cangsheng, the others from Northern Song's Spiritual Academy are relatively weak. The strongest among them is that He Yao, but she's only at the early heaven-reaching stage. That beautiful girl, though, is something I can't quite see through. Perhaps she might be the wild card. The azure-robed man's gaze swept over Mu Chun and the others in the distance. When it lingered on Mu Chun, his eyes flashed with surprise, and he frowned slightly. Late heaven transformation stage? Could this year's batch of students from Northern Song Spiritual Academy be this week? And he looked toward Wu Jia, who was silently sitting in the sky. His eyes were cold, but he remained eerily silent. Of the four, aside from the Devil Dragon Child, it's actually Wu Jia, ranked last, who is the most troublesome. The figure behind him nodded. A fifth-rank spiritual array master, though silent, once he takes action, he might be even more difficult to deal with than Mu Gu or Gu Xiong. The four from the Devil Dragon Child's side were all fierce warriors, while Northern Song's Spiritual Academy only had a slight numerical advantage, but even that was now stripped away. It seemed they were truly cornered. "Heh, so, have you all made your decisions?" The Devil Dragon Child grinned, looking at Shen Cangsheng and the others. All eyes in Western Desolation City were on Shen Cangsheng and the others, curious how they would allocate their opponents in this situation. "I'll deal with the Devil Dragon Child," Shen Cangsheng said in a deep voice. Among them, his strength was the greatest, and only he could take on the Devil Dragon Child in a one-on-one battle. No one objected to this. "Then I'll handle Mu Gu," Luo Li said, her delicate hand tightly gripping her sword's hilt, her glass-like eyes glinting with icy resolve. "I'll take care of Wu Jia," Li Xinong suddenly spoke up. Though Wu Jia ranked last among the four, they all knew the terrifying capabilities of this fifth-rank spiritual array master. If he set up a spiritual array, even someone at the mid-heaven reaching stage would find themselves in a dire situation. Li Xintong understood this, so he decided to take on Wu Jia. Shen Cangsheng glanced at Mu Chun. The latter narrowed his eyes, focusing on the silent Wu Jia floating in the sky. He shook his head lightly. "I'll handle him. I'm also a spiritual array master." He didn't doubt Li Xuantong's strength, but Wu Jia's methods were strange. Even if Li Xintong couldn't be killed outright, once Wu Jia set up a spiritual array, it would be very easy to entangle him. Their current goal was to buy time for the Devil Dragon Child, and they could not afford to be delayed. They had to end the battle quickly. Thus, it was best for Mu Chun, as a fellow spiritual array master, to deal with him. Li Xintong fell silent for a moment, then nodded gently. "Be careful. Since that's decided, let's begin." Shen Cangsheng gripped the Golden Lotus War God spear tightly. For this type of confrontation, everyone clearly had their guesses and were not surprised. Li Xintong also shot out rapidly, appearing in front of Gu Xiong. Luo Li, with her jade-like hands gripping a long sword, softly said to Mu Chun, "Be careful. I'll help you as soon as I can." As her words fell, She dashed out, locking her target on Mu Gu. This caused some stir within Western Desolation City. The beautiful girl, who seemed to have just emerged, had become the opponent of Mu Gu, who ranked second on the bounty list. In the sky, only Wu Jia remained unchosen. The latter's face remained indifferent, and his eyes flickered, resembling a venomous snake's tongue. Everyone was staring at the remaining people from Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. Against the seemingly lowest-ranked Wu Jia, who was actually more troublesome than both Mu Gu and Gue Xiong, would anyone step up? In the Grand Hall, the azure-robed man seemed quite interested as he stared at the sky. Amid the countless speculations, Mu Chen slowly exhaled a puff of white air and stepped forward. Swish! Countless gazes instantly gathered. When they saw Mu Chen's strength, incredulity appeared on their faces. This boy, at the late heaven transformation stage, actually dared to make a move? The azure-robed man in the Grand Hall was slightly stunned, then narrowed his eyes, flicking his fingers as he muttered to himself, "Late heaven transformation stage, facing a 5th-ranked spirit array master. Heh, this is truly interesting. I wonder if he's seeking death or truly has astonishing methods." Boom. 9 golden divine mountains stood tall in this world of spiritual light, their golden radiance flowing like a divine residence, emitting an overwhelming spiritual pressure that made one's heart tremble. Mu Chen's expression grew serious. The spiritual array Wu Jia set up might not be weaker than the twin lotus demon lotus slaughtering array. Wu Jia indeed had some skills. In the distance, Wu Jia gazed indifferently at Mu Chen. He didn't speak any further, only waved his sleeve. Immediately, the 9 golden divine mountains trembled, and golden waves of energy surged outward. Boom! A golden divine mountain shot up into the sky, then came crashing down with overwhelming shadows and golden light, moving in an unexplainably fierce manner to suppress Mu Chen. The air exploded beneath the golden divine mountain, and the space twisted. Facing this assault, even someone at the mid-heaven-reaching stage would likely not dare to underestimate it. Mu Chen's black pupils reflected the golden divine mountain descending toward him. He exhaled a long breath of white air, his gaze suddenly sharp. His fists clenched tightly, and with a punch, he struck out. A vast amount of spiritual energy transformed into a starry sky behind him, and the white tiger materialized, roaring toward the heavens. It turned into a streak of light that followed Mu Chen's punch, roaring through the sky, clashing violently with the divine mountain. Boom! A violent spiritual energy storm raged. Though the golden divine mountain was forced back, the white tiger was shattered by the terrifying force, scattering into countless light particles. Wu Jia sneered at the sight, his lips curling into a cold smile. Changing his hand seals, 3 divine mountains roared down, their momentum startling. Mu Chen's gaze turned icy. In the starry sky behind him, 3 massive figures once again took shape. This time, however, their momentum was far stronger, as the 3 light shadows shot out, blocking the 3 divine mountains. Swish! As the divine mountains were blocked, Mu Chen's figure shot out like lightning. Black lightning arcs flickered around his body, and a black lightning rune slowly appeared on his chest. 1 mark thunder body. Mu Chen's speed surged, directly rushing under one of the divine mountains. The black flame-like spiritual energy burst out from his body like a beam of light, his 5 fingers gripping tightly, veins bulging at his fists. Then, the lightning-arched fist was thrown forward, crashing directly into the bottom of the divine mountain. Boom! The punch hit, and it felt as if the entire sky trembled violently. Massive cracks quickly spread from his fist, and in just a few moments, they covered the entire divine mountain. Boom! The towering mountain that seemed to touch the sky shattered completely under Mu Chen's punch. After breaking the divine mountain with his punch, Mu Chen's body flashed with dragon shadows, retreating several hundred meters. As he retreated, another divine mountain came crashing down where he had been standing earlier. Wu Jia's eyes flashed with a cold glint when he saw Mu Chen shatter a divine mountain with a single punch. This guy seemed to have cultivated a powerful body-forging divine art. Otherwise, it would have been impossible to destroy a divine mountain with his late heaven transformation stage power. But do you really think my ninefold mountain array is that simple? Wu Jia sneered, changing his hand seals. Chen watched as the golden divine mountain, which had been shattered into countless light spots by his punch, began to reform. In just a few breaths, a towering mountain had reappeared. My 9 divine mountains stretch endlessly. No matter how many you destroy, they will reform until you are utterly exhausted and have exhausted all your spiritual energy. Wu Jia's cold voice echoed with a touch of mockery. Chen seemed to have not heard it. His figure shot forward again, like a bolt of black lightning, crashing violently into one of the divine mountains. Boom! Another divine mountain was forcefully shattered by Chen. However, the light spots once again gathered together and formed a perfectly intact divine mountain. Wu Jia smiled lightly, a mocking hint in his grin. This Chen really didn't know when to quit. Trapped in his ninefold mountain array, no matter how many tricks he had, or how powerful he was, he couldn't escape. After shattering 3 divine mountains and watching them reform, Chen didn't rashly waste more spiritual energy. Instead, he sneered, "It's got some tricks, but it's just a 5th-grade spirit array. Do you really think you're a spiritual array master?" The ninefold mountain array was indeed impressive, but Chen didn't believe Wu Jia's words. That level of array was beyond Wu Jia's ability to set up. Moreover, it was beyond the scope of a 5th-grade spirit array. He looked up at the 9 divine mountains surrounding him in a circular formation, their golden light overflowing, making them appear as if forged from pure gold. His black eyes reflected the divine mountains, their light shimmering with sharp brilliance. After a moment, he muttered to himself, "Is it an illusion?" Wu Jia's pupils contracted sharply, and for the first time, he looked at Chen with a sinister gaze. A strong killing intent surged in his heart. This guy was indeed troublesome. There should be only one real divine mountain among these 9, right? If I destroy it, your array won't have much to boast about, will it? Chen locked his gaze on Wu Jia, who was now casting a shadow, and smiled. That's if you have the ability to do so. Wu Jia's heart trembled slightly, but his expression darkened further. He changed his hand seals, and the 9 divine mountains began to move. The golden light spread out, obscuring the mountains and making it impossible to see their locations clearly. Boom, boom. One by one, the divine mountains descended with crushing force, trying to annihilate Chen. Chen activated Dragon Soar Art, his body transforming like a dragon's shadow, dodging the descending divine mountains. Any unavoidable attacks were met with a powerful punch, smashing them apart. I need to find the real divine mountain. Chen stared at the brilliant golden light ocean, a thought crossing his mind. After a brief pause, he slowly closed his eyes. Wu Jia watched as Chen suddenly closed his eyes, and for some reason, an uneasy feeling crept up in his heart. Boom. In the distant sky above Western Desolation City, 2 figures with the most intense spiritual energy fluctuations were locked in fierce combat. Each clash of spiritual energy ripples resembled massive waves, sweeping across the battlefield and drawing the attention of countless spectators in the city. This was the battleground between Shen Cangsheng and Devil Dragon Child. Boom! A golden torrent of energy tore through the sky, carrying a domineering force as it shot out. Roar! A dragon's roar seemed to echo as a demonic dragon emerged, its malevolent aura spreading across the sky. With claws bared, it collided head-on with the golden torrent of energy. The sky seemed to tremble violently as a spiritual energy storm ravaged the area. The golden figure was forced back, but Shen Cangsheng slammed his golden spear into the void, stabilizing his form. At this moment, his body bore several wounds, clearly showing the toll the battle with Devil Dragon Child had taken on him. In the distance, gray-black spiritual energy rippled with a menacing aura, forming massive demonic dragons. He stared indifferently at Shen Cangsheng, his hand slowly gripping the black sword strapped to his back. The sword was somewhat oversized, covered with blood-red streaks that darkened the blade, as if formed from coagulated blood. Enough. His voice was chillingly cold. Shen Cangsheng's resilience had exceeded his expectations. Although the latter had now reached the late heaven-reaching stage, Perhaps by the next time they met, Shen Cangsheng would have broken through entirely. At that point, the Devil Dragon Child would have no certainty of defeating him again. As the champion of the heavenly ranking at the Northern Tsang Spiritual Academy, the Devil Dragon Child harbored deep wariness toward him. A foe like this, if left alive, would become an ever-growing threat. WHRR. As the Devil Dragon Child's hand clasped the heavy black sword, the blade seemed to emit a bloodthirsty hum. It sounded as if a devilish dragon was roaring through the heavens. Inside the palace of the city, the azure-robed man gazed at the black sword in the Devil Dragon Child's hand, his expression tightening as he muttered, "Is that the dragon-severing sword of the Dragon Demon Palace?" Shen Cangsheng also sensed the extreme danger emanating from the sword, his face growing grim. He gripped the Golden Lotus War God's spear tightly, and his spiritual energy surged without restraint. He knew that the Devil Dragon Child had made up his mind to eliminate him at all costs. Roar! The black heavy sword shot into the sky, a wave of black light sweeping outward, like a devilish dragon breaking its chains, soaring through the heavens. The Devil Dragon Child's hands swiftly formed seals, and a torrent of spiritual energy erupted, spreading like a flood. The energy surged upward, forming a towering wave of spiritual force, before being absorbed entirely by the black heavy sword. Roar! As the sword absorbed the energy, the gray-black spiritual energy quickly condensed, layer after layer of dragon scales manifesting. In just a few breaths, the black heavy sword transformed into a massive, 1,000-foot-long true demon dragon. The demon dragon's blood-red eyes glared fiercely, exuding an insatiable thirst for blood. The murderous aura spread across the sky, causing the temperature of the world to plummet. The dragon coiled in the air, its body as cold and unyielding as cast iron, radiating immense power, as though it could shatter the very fabric of the world. This beast was enough to strike terror into anyone who saw it. It was almost a real demon dragon. Shen Cangsheng's face paled as he gazed at the terrifying creature circling above. He took a deep breath, gripping the Golden Lotus War God's spear tighter. At this moment, he could not afford to retreat. If he did, the other 3 battlefields would be dragged into this conflict. Then let's fight to the end. A massive golden light erupted from within him, spreading across the sky. Meanwhile, under the vast spiritual array that enveloped the heavens, Wu Jia, trapped within the ninefold mountain array, trembled. Deep within his soul, it felt as though an eye was slowly opening. This mysterious eye seemed to open deep within Wu Jia's soul, neither entirely real nor entirely unreal, as if it could pierce through all the fog of the world. Wu Jia's eyes also slowly opened. However, his once dark pupils had now transformed into a transparent, crystalline color. Under these crystalline eyes, it was as if the world itself was being seen through. The world before him shifted, no longer as vivid. The overwhelming spiritual energy, under the gaze of his crystalline eyes, seemed to break down and return to its most basic form, the essence of heaven and earth's spiritual energy. Wu Jia looked at the 9 divine mountains, hidden within the blinding golden light. However, this time, the golden light no longer obscured his vision. Under his crystalline eyes, the 9 mountains became transparent, with only the one on the far right still radiating bright light. Numerous spiritual energy beams emitted from this mountain, linking to the other 8, emanating a mysterious, powerful fluctuation. This mountain was different from the others. "I've finally found you." A faint smile tugged at Wu Jia's lips. In the distance, Wu Jia noticed Wu Jia's change in state. When he saw Wu Jia's crystalline eyes, his body trembled. An expression of disbelief wiped away the gloom in his gaze, and he couldn't help but exclaim, "The hard eye?" Wu Jia was shocked. However, the hard eye state was not something easily comprehended. Countless spiritual array masters had exhausted their efforts, yet they remained unable to unlock this mysterious ability. But now, this state had manifested in such a young boy. The sheer impact of this realization made Wu Jia's expression turn extremely grim. He had always prided himself on his unparalleled talent in spiritual array cultivation, yet at this moment, Wu Jia had shattered his confidence completely. Swish! As Wu Jia was still reeling from the shock, Chen suddenly burst forth, shooting straight toward the final, hidden divine mountain. As long as he could shatter that mountain, the entire grand array would collapse. Boom. Seeing this, Wu Jia's expression changed drastically. His hand seals shifted rapidly as he urgently commanded the remaining 8 divine mountains to descend upon Chen, aiming to crush him under their overwhelming force. Chen clenched his palm, and black light surged. A black pagoda materialized before expanding rapidly in the wind, growing to a colossal size of 1,000 feet, standing tall between heaven and earth. Bang! The 9-tiered pagoda shot forward, colliding fiercely with the 8 divine mountains. For golden dragons roared around the pagoda, radiating dazzling golden light. While the 9-tiered pagoda held back the 8 divine mountains, Chen's body was enveloped in dragon shadows, more refined and vivid than ever before. The dragon carried Chen across the sky in an instant, positioning him directly beneath the 9th divine mountain. With a single step, Chen propelled himself upward like a rock, charging straight at the towering mountain. Black lightning arcs crackled wildly around his body as he clenched his fist tightly, his crystal-clear eyes flashing with an intense, unwavering determination. Boom! His fist, wrapped in black lightning and boundless spiritual energy, smashed violently into the base of the divine mountain. Break for me! A thunderous roar echoed across the heavens. Black lightning erupted, and in an instant, massive cracks spread from where Chen's fist had landed. The entire divine mountain trembled violently, and as the fracture spread, they eventually engulfed the entire mountain. Wu Jia's face underwent a drastic change. Roar! High above the sky, a monstrous demonic dragon coiled, exuding a terrifying aura. Its presence was like that of a true ancient demon dragon, causing the heavens and earth to tremble in fear. In Western Desolation City, countless powerful figures turned pale with shock. The strength of the devil dragon child had reached such an unfathomable level. Back in the grand hall, the azure-robed man's gaze sharpened slightly. Shen Cangsheng, this farce ends now? The devil dragon child stood proudly beneath the demonic dragon, looking down at Shen Cangsheng with a ruthless smirk. Then, he extended his finger and pointed toward Shen Cangsheng from afar. Roar! The demonic dragon let out an earth-shaking roar before transforming into a streak of black lightning, diving downward. The sheer force of its descent distorted space itself, and even the very air collapsed under the pressure, exploding outward. The spiritual energy in the surroundings dispersed chaotically. This attack possessed enough force to obliterate a mid-heaven-reaching stage powerhouse. Watching from afar, Su Xian, He Yao, and the others turned pale. They had all sensed the terrifying power behind this strike. Under the dragon's deadly descent, Shen Cangsheng lifted his gaze. His grip on the golden lotus war god's spear trembled slightly before his eyes surged with blazing battle intent. He took a step forward, a deep growl rising from his throat. Brilliant golden light erupted from his body, making him appear impossibly radiant. His golden spear trembled before he thrust it forward at an incredibly deliberate yet forceful pace. Boom! The space ahead rippled and distorted. A moment later, a golden spear shadow, hundreds of feet tall, emerged behind Shen Cangsheng. Judgment divine art, judgment spear. A low, commanding voice echoed. The golden spear projection radiated an indescribable aura of divine judgment, as if a god itself had descended to pass sentence upon the world. A suffocating pressure filled the battlefield. Buzz! The massive golden spear shadow shot forward, slicing through the heavens. Under the watchful, anxious gazes of countless onlookers, it collided head-on with the diving demonic dragon. Boom! A deafening explosion resounded through the heavens and earth. The collision triggered a massive storm of golden and black spiritual energy, engulfing the sky and darkening the once bright heavens. Violent gales tore through the air. Countless people held their breath, their eyes fixed on the raging energy storm. Could Shen Cangsheng withstand such a devastating strike from the devil dragon child? Back in the grand hall, the azure-robed man narrowed his eyes, his gaze sharpening. At the instant his gaze wavered, Countless onlookers were shocked to witness the spiritual energy storm being forcibly torn apart. The massive spear shadow was firmly grasped by two demonic dragon claws, which then clenched tightly. Boom! The golden spear shadow was ruthlessly crushed, and a ferocious demonic dragon burst forth from the dissipating spiritual energy storm. With an overwhelming, menacing presence, it descended upon Shen Cangsheng. A surge of boundless spiritual energy erupted from Shen Cangsheng's body, forming his final defense. This was all he could do now. Boom! The demonic dragon crashed down upon him, striking his body with devastating force. Blood spurted wildly from his mouth, and his chest caved inward from the impact. His body was sent flying like a bird with broken wings, plummeting straight to the ground before smashing into it with immense force. The earth instantly collapsed, buildings crumbling in waves as massive cracks spread outward. A heavy silence fell over the entire city. Countless figures soared into the sky, gazing at the ruined battlefield below as thick clouds of dust billowed upward. In the distance, Su Xian, He Yao, and the others turned pale, their bodies cold with dread. Was this the true power of the devil dragon child? Even Shen Cangsheng couldn't stop him? High above, the devil dragon child hovered in midair, gazing indifferently at the devastation below. With a flick of his sleeve, a fierce gust swept away the lingering dust and debris. As the dust settled, everyone finally saw the scene within. The ground had been deeply concaved, and at its lowest point, Shen Cangsheng, his robes in tatters and body covered in blood, wobbled as he struggled to stand. He still held onto his spear, but its once glowing body had dimmed, clearly suffering severe damage. Though Shen Cangsheng remained standing, it was obvious to all. He had lost the strength to continue fighting. With no one left to restrain the devil dragon child, wouldn't he now be able to take full control of the battlefield? Shen Cangsheng, do you have any last words? The devil dragon child floated in the air, his lips curving into a victorious smile. Shen Cangsheng was strong, but he had yet to reach the late heaven-reaching stage. Clashing head-on with him was a battle he could never win. Shen Cangsheng glared fiercely at the devil dragon child, attempting to circulate his spiritual energy, only to cough up another mouthful of blood. His body swayed unsteadily. It seems this battle is ours. The Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy is nothing special. The devil dragon child shook his head in mock pity. Then, clenching his palm, a surge of immense spiritual energy coalesced. His gaze darkened with killing intent. He was ready to end Shen Cangsheng once and for all. He couldn't afford to let such a talent continue growing. In your next life, don't waste your time in a worthless place like the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. He sneered as his hand, brimming with overwhelming spiritual energy, prepared to unleash a killing blow. Boom! At that exact moment, a deafening explosion erupted from the distant sky, where a massive spiritual array had been shrouding the battlefield. Countless people turned in shock, even the devil dragon child momentarily pausing. The immense spiritual array trembled violently before shattering completely with a thunderous blast. Shimmering fragments of light rained down from the sky. All eyes focused on the area where the light was most concentrated. Amidst the glow, two figures seemed to be faintly emerging. Inside the grand hall, the azure-robed man's expression shifted for the first time. A deep shock surfaced in his gaze as he muttered, "How is this possible?" As the dazzling light gradually faded, the two figures finally came into view. At their appearance, the entire city fell into a stunned silence. The two figures stood face to face at close range. However, one of them had his hand firmly gripping the other's throat. The latter's face was ghastly pale, frozen in place, not daring to move an inch. In the distance, Su Xian gasped and covered her mouth in shock. Beside her, He Yao and the others were equally shaken, because the one standing tall was Mu Chen, and the one whose throat was in his grasp was Wu Jia. In that battlefield, Mu Chen had won. For a brief moment, the entire atmosphere of Western Desolation City seemed to freeze. Countless eyes, filled with astonishment, locked onto the scene in the sky. Then, after a long silence, The corners of their mouths twitched in disbelief. In the sky, Mu Chen stood suspended in midair, his upper clothes torn and stained with blood, dark lightning crackling around his body. At this moment, his face was chillingly cold, his eyes sharp as blades, staring at Wu Jia, whose face was reddened in front of him. Mu Chen's hand was like an iron claw, gripping Wu Jia's throat. Spiritual energy surged in his palm, and with just a slight push, he could shatter Wu Jia's windpipe. Wu Jia's face turned ashen, his eyes still filled with disbelief. He seemed unable to recover from the shock of Mu Chen's violent breach of his formation and the crushing defeat he had just suffered. Though Wu Jia's own strength was at the early heaven-reaching stage, he never expected that once Mu Chen broke his spiritual formation, he would be defeated so quickly. Mu Chen's combat strength clearly far surpassed his apparent power. The silence in the city was soon shattered by an eruption of shocked exclamations, even more intense than when Shen Cangsheng was defeated, for this scene was utterly unexpected. Who could have imagined that Wu Jia, a fifth-rank spirit array master, would be defeated by Mu Chen, whose cultivation was only at the late heaven transformation stage? "How interesting," said a man in azure robes, smiling slightly as he glanced at Mu Chen. "This boy seems to have some hidden skills. No wonder he dared to make a move in such a setting. But even with Wu Jia defeated, they still have no chance of winning," he murmured. With Shen Cangsheng already defeated, and the devil dragon child now free to act, facing someone as ruthless as him, no one in the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy could stand against him. At this point, the situation was turning in favor of the devil dragon child's side. Even if Mu Chen won, it would be hard to change the tide, as the devil dragon child was far beyond Wu Jia's level. Su Xian, He Yao, and the others were briefly startled by Mu Chen's victory, but their expressions quickly became solemn. They all understood the difficulty of the current situation. If Shen Cangsheng still had the strength to fight and could team up with Mu Chen, they might stand a chance against the devil dragon child. But now, Shen Cangsheng was severely injured, and on the other side, although Li Xintong and Luo Li were having the upper hand, they were entangled in a fierce struggle, unable to break free in time. In the meantime, the devil dragon child would likely crush Mu Chen. In the sky, Mu Chen glanced coldly at the subdued Wu Jia before turning his attention to another direction. When his gaze landed on Shen Cangsheng, bloodied and weak, his heart sank. As expected, Shen Cangsheng was no match for the devil dragon child. "Heh, this is truly unexpected," said the devil dragon child, his gaze resting on Mu Chen for a moment before he smiled lightly. "But it's still a bit too late." Swoosh. In the distance, Su Xian, He Yao, and the others rushed over, landing beside Shen Cangsheng. They shielded him, keeping a wary eye on the devil dragon child. Mu Chen glanced toward the battlefield of Luo Li and Li Xianhong. Both of them had noticed the change and suddenly intensified their attacks, hoping to end the battle quickly and come to Mu Chen's aid. However, Mu Gu and Gue Xiong were no pushovers either, and they began fighting even more fiercely, using deadly moves to hold the two of them back. Mu Chen's eyes flashed slightly, and then he slapped Wu Jia's chest with a powerful strike. Wu Jia immediately spat out a mouthful of blood, his spiritual energy fluctuating and collapsing. It was clear that he had been severely injured. After neutralizing Wu Jia's combat ability, Mu Chen tossed him towards Su Xian and the others, then raised his head and locked his cold, steely gaze on the devil dragon child. His body once again radiated vast, overwhelming spiritual energy. "You are no match for me," Mu Chen said with a blank expression, his eyes still cold. The devil dragon child only smiled faintly. "You really are an annoying little brat." A murderous aura surged in his eyes, and deep in his gaze, a fierce killing intent emerged. This entire situation had gone awry in a way that Mu Chen had disrupted his plans, and that infuriated him deeply. "I really want to kill you now." A terrifying malevolent aura, accompanied by overwhelming spiritual power, erupted from the devil dragon child, sweeping toward Mu Chen. In the next instant, he moved like a streak of lightning, charging forward. "Mu Chen, be careful." Su Xian and the others cried out in alarm. As expected, the devil dragon child was ruthless and had already made his move. The devil dragon child moved with incredible speed. In the blink of an eye, he appeared right in front of Mu Chen. Just as he was about to unleash a vicious palm strike, a dragon silhouette suddenly emerged around Mu Chen's body. With a flash of light, he swiftly darted out of the devil dragon child's attack range. This is dragon sword art? The devil dragon child's expression shifted in shock as he watched the dragon silhouette flash past Mu Chen's body. His eyes darkened as he said, "It seems you've gained quite a bit from the White Dragon Supreme's spiritual treasury. You've even learned his dragon sword art." The White Dragon Supreme had once been one of the top leaders in the Dragon Demon Palace, so the devil dragon child was familiar with his unique techniques. The dragon sword art was a powerful body technique. Once perfected, it allowed one to transform into a divine dragon, capable of moving through space at will. Even supreme powerhouses would find it difficult to stop. When the White Dragon Supreme betrayed the Dragon Demon Palace, despite their all-out efforts to stop him, he managed to escape, relying on the dragon sword art. Although Mu Chen's dragon sword art was still at the early dragon shadow stage, its speed was already incredibly fast, making it quite troublesome for his opponent. The dragon silhouette surrounded Mu Chen's body, making him appear like a wisp of smoke. He kept his focus on the devil dragon child, his mind alert. He needed to buy as much time as possible. Once he could delay until Luoli or Li Shintong finished their battles, it would be much easier for him. However, the devil dragon child had clearly seen through his intentions. He sneered and said, "The dragon sword art is indeed powerful, but you're still in the early stages. Do you really think I can't handle you?" With a step forward, a vast amount of spiritual energy surged forth, darkening the sky and enveloping the entire area. Dragon Demon Shield. The gray-black spiritual energy covered the area, forming a massive light shield that surrounded an area of several thousand meters, trapping Mu Chen within it. Roar! Roar! Along with the shield's coverage, fierce dragon roars echoed through the air. These roars carried a strange magical power that made Mu Chen's body feel heavier. The devil dragon child's eyes grew cold as he extended his palm and slammed it down with a chilling command, "Dragon Demon Hand." Boom! A mighty surge of spiritual energy gathered in the sky, transforming into a colossal hand, over 100 feet long, covered in black dragon scales. It glimmered with a cold, menacing light, as if it could tear apart mountains. The massive hand came crashing down toward Mu Chen with a sharp, ear-piercing sound. Mu Chen watched the shadow of the giant hand descending upon him. His spiritual energy surged, and behind him, a starry sky materialized. Within the stars, 3 enormous beasts took shape, radiating a brilliant starlight as they charged forward. The 4 deities' constellation cannon, White Tiger Divine Seal, Black Tortoise Divine Seal, Vermilion Bird Divine Seal. The roars of the beasts echoed across the heavens as the 3 giant creatures collided fiercely with the gray-black giant hand. Boom! A thunderous sound reverberated through the air as violent spiritual energy waves swept outward. Even Mu Chen was blasted back over 1,000 meters, his blood surging within him. His face grew serious. Only after facing the devil dragon child in battle did he truly understand the extent of his power. No wonder even Shen Cangsheng had been unable to stop him. Mu Chen lifted his gaze and looked toward the area where the energy waves were still sweeping through. There, the devil dragon child stood atop the energy currents, one hand behind his back, his expression indifferent. The earlier clash had no impact on him whatsoever. "To withstand my attack with your late heaven transformation stage cultivation, you do have some skill," the devil dragon child said, glancing at Mu Chen, whose chest was slightly heaving. Mu Chen's expression remained unchanged, but his hand inside his robe trembled slightly, causing the surrounding space to ripple. "The White Dragon Supreme was once one of us in the Dragon Demon Palace. Now that you've learned the dragon sword art, you have some connection to our palace. If you kill Chen Cangsheng and the others, I might consider letting you join the Dragon Demon Palace. Your future there would be far better than in the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy." The devil dragon child suddenly smiled. If he could recruit Mu Chen into the Dragon Demon Palace, it would be a major blow to the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy's reputation. A force that was chased out of the northern heaven, spiritual academy like a stray dog dares to say such things? Mu Chen sneered. If you refuse my offer, then you'll hang here in Western Desolation City with them today. The devil dragon child's eyes grew cold. Mu Chen's body was enveloped in a dragon shadow. His figure rapidly retreated, his black eyes once again becoming crystal clear, and his hands suddenly formed a seal. Boom! The moment Mu Chen's hands completed the seal, the entire sky trembled. Soon, countless onlookers witnessed a burst of light, as overwhelming spiritual energy surged, blocking out the sun. In just a few breaths of time, a massive spiritual array materialized. Within the array, two gigantic black lotuses slowly rotated, releasing a terrifying spiritual energy fluctuation that moved the hearts of all who felt it. Demonic Lotus Slaughter Array. A low shout echoed in Mu Chen's mind, and then his gaze turned cold. With a single palm strike, the enormous spiritual array began to activate beneath the countless trembling eyes below. The man in the azure robe at the palace saw this, and a hint of surprise crossed his face. This level of spiritual array had already reached the category of a 5th-rank spirit array. Could it be that this young man in front of him was also a 5th-rank spirit array master? A 5th-rank spirit array master at this age? The man in the azure robe narrowed his eyes.